Hello, 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 dear buddies. How are you all doing? I hope everybody is learning, playing, and eating well, right? So, let me welcome you all to your most amazing platform, and that is none other than PW Gulf, right? And today we are going to summarize a very important and much awaited chapter, which is your control and coordination. With me, your biology buddy Nikita. Okay, so let's begin. See, let's start talking about this control and coordination and, of course, our life. We are too busy in our life, aren't we? We are talking about our homework, our academia, and also non-academic things, our extracurricular activities, our me time, our physical balance, and also working towards our proper mental and emotional and as well as social well-being, right? We need to have a proper control and coordination in within our body and with the social environment as well, right? Of course, we have friends to talk to things, we can work together. Similarly, in our body also, what's happening? We have to do our vital functions. We have to breathe. We have to take in the oxygen, right? And of course, our heart is completely and all the time, it's just keep on pumping the blood. Now, all of these functions, these are involuntary. Now, suppose I have to move from one place to another. And also, I can see something, right? I can see you all guys just taking all of these notes, taking out your pen and paper, right? So also I will be hearing you, right? I can hear my sound as well. So all of these things, all of the activities, external, internal activities, right? They're happening inside our body. But how is that possible? To do a lot of work, a lot of activities, there is a requirement of proper control. And they need to be done in a proper coordination amongst themselves, right? So now, how do they do it? Inside our body, how do we do it, right? So, of course, all of these things we are going to talk about in this chapter. Now, when we are talking about our other activities like our social well-being and also performing our academia and non-academics as well, we just forget to focus on our life, on our sleep, right? And also taking proper rest, our workout, right? So therefore, there is a need to make a proper balance. And of course, this balance is not something that you'll find that I am working here, so I will be having a proper work-life balance and somebody will be giving it to me. Of course not. Things like that do not happen. So balance cannot be something that you can find, but it can only be created. And for that, of course, we have talked about the Pomodoro technique and there are other techniques as well. Just plan your day, make your day scheduled, and of course, you will find that work-life balance that you're looking for, okay? Of course, juggling between schools and other things, you will find your balance, just you need to have a proper will and determination. Of course, proper coordination as well, right? So let's begin our chapter. Let's start talking about the proper control and coordination in our body. So first, let's see what all things there are to study in this chapter. And there are to study neural control, hormonal control. Why only talk about these movable organisms? We have plants as well, are immovable organisms. So we'll talk about plant hormones and if there is some sort of movement in plant, right? So we'll be talking about all of these concepts. Now, let us start with the control and coordination, right? All of the functions that are happening inside our body, they have a master. And this master controls all the activities, right? And they are to be done in the proper coordination. So how do we do it? Let's see that this coordination and control can happen in two ways. Our body has first neural control and then we have hormonal control. This neural control is done by the electrical signaling. And this electrical signaling controls all the body functions, and for that we have our proper nervous system, right? And this nervous system has nerves. They have branching paths, very important functional paths that will help to bring about this neural control. Like they will help in the proper functioning of all the organs, our respiratory system, the digestive system, right? And also our circulatory system. So everything will be done by the neural control. But not just neural control, right? We need other help as well. And to assess that, we have the hormonal control. These hormonal controls are done by the glands. Okay, and the gland secretes substances in the form of chemicals. So what type of signaling it would be? It would be chemical signaling that will help to coordinate all the body functions. Okay, now let's move forward to talk about that we are doing all of these works, right? For example, while I was here, I can hear some sound, somebody speaking outside, right? And of course, I can see myself in front of me. Then let's see that of course there is something that has been made outside, and I can also smell those things. Now there was a mosquito sitting on my hand, right? So I just felt it on my skin. So all of these are also done under the control of nervous system, and for that we have 5 basic sensory receptors. Okay, now let's see that when I told you that I heard something, it was because it was received, it was perceived by our ears, and the ears have phonoreceptors, right? That will give the sound of body balance. Okay, now next let's talk about that when I see something, it gives us sense of sight, and those receptors are our photoreceptors. Whenever there's a term photo is always related to light. Okay, then I smell something. How do I do that? I have olfactory receptors that are present in the nose. Okay, so olfaction is related to the smell. Then I felt something heat, something cold, somebody sitting on my skin, right? Like for example, mosquitoes. So what is that? That has been perceived by the skin, and the skin has thermoreceptors for temperature regulation, or you can say for temperature sensing. Okay, so that is by thermoreceptors. And on the tongue, I can taste food, right? Very delicious, or we can say spicy, sweet, sour food, and that has been done by the gustatory receptors present on our tongue. Okay, so with all of these receptors, we are able to perceive the senses, right? We are able to perceive the information. We are able to get the stimulus. Stimulus means any substance or event that can have or bring about any reaction. Alright, so these are the receptors present in the humans. Now let's see that to perform all these, we need to have certain specialized structures. Okay, so let's talk about that in our nervous system. We have a branching part. Okay, very important functional and structural unit of our nervous system, and that is termed as neuron. Okay, can you see a branching system here? It's just like a tree-like structure. Okay, now let's see, the nervous system has 3 parts. Okay, 3 things are to be done. First, to perceive the stimulus. Like for example, let's see that we have here a tree. Okay, now what will happen? So of course, I have these eyes here. Okay, these are my eyes. Now what happened here? I saw the tree, right? So my eye perceived the signal that there is something in front of me, and that is a tree. Now what will happen? These neurons will perceive it and then send it further in the form of electrical signaling. Okay, so they will first perceive, then transmit the signal so that we can process it. Our nervous system can process it, and then further send again a signal that yes, this object here in front of you is a tree. Okay, so first they will sense it and then process it and finally decide it. Okay, so here let's see the branching structure is of our neuron, which is the functional and structural unit of our nervous system. Now it is divided into 3 parts. Okay, so this first part here is dendrite. Then it has the cell body, which is also known as soma, and further it will extend to a long tube, and this long tube is known as axon. Okay, so 3 parts. Now of course it has other parts as well. Let's start talking about it. So can you see this branching part? This branching part is the dendrite. Okay, and it has the cell body. Now it continues to a long tube, and that long tube is axon. Now let's see, this axon sometimes in some neurons is covered by an insulating layer, and this insulating layer is known as the myelin sheath. Okay, and it is secreted by the Schwann cells. Now let's see that between in the middle or in some parts at a regular interval of the myelin sheath, there is a depression. Can you see this depression? Where myelin sheath is absent, and that depression is known as nodes of Ranvier. Okay, now we have talked about this long axon. Of course, a neuron has to end as well. So the axon ends at a long blob-like structures. Okay, so this here, the ending, the terminal is known as the axon terminal. Okay, and this is entire neuron. Of course, when you want to draw it, just think of a branching tree. Okay, draw some branches and then extend it to a long tube and then end it. Okay, that's your neuron. Now let's talk about those functions. So first we have seen a signal, right? So of course this signal is perceived by the dendrite. Here it gets processed and transmitted further. So this is formed in the form of electrical signaling, which is getting transported further. Okay, now this axon takes the electrical signaling and then transmit it from the axon terminal to another neuron. And let's see, suppose that this was here. Let's talk about that this was your neuron. Let's end it as well. Okay, now here let's start another neuron. There is a microscopic gap between them. Okay, here the microscopic gap between them is known as synapse. This microscopic gap is known as synapse that will help in the transmission, the transportation of the electrical signaling. Where? From the axon terminal. Now who will perceive the signal? To the dendrites. Okay, so here you can say that here if we have the stimulus which was perceived by the dendrite, now it goes in the form of electrical signaling, and from the axon terminal of one neuron it passes through the gap which is synapse and then gets transmitted to another neuron. Okay, and the signal would be perceived by the dendrites. Alright, and further to many neurons it passes, so that it can reach our nervous system, and then we can process that what did we see, what did we hear, what did we smell, right, or any other external stimulus. Alright, now of course a lot of things, incredible amount of work has been done in our body. So for that these neurons are not enough, right? So what do we do then? Our body consists of several parts that can actually help in this control and coordination. So that contributes to our nervous system, and our nervous system is of 2 types. Okay, it has 2 parts, you can say. The first part is the CNS. Okay, what is the full form of CNS? It's the central nervous system. Now this central nervous system comprises of the hub or the center, right? You can say heart of the central nervous system. And that heart means, see, the heart is situated in the center, of course slightly tilted at the left side, right? So you can say the heart of the central nervous system is your brain. Very, very important. And then it consists of spinal cord, very delicate structures. Okay, this brain and spinal cord, they will instigate the information, command and then coordinate with other body parts so that they can perform the function. Alright, so let's see that this brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system which will help in the control and coordination. Therefore, they are also known as the CPU. CPU is the central processing unit of a computer, right? So, brain, our central nervous system, is the CPU of our body. Now, not just that. See, the brain and the spinal cord consist of the nerves, right? Now, let's see that these nerves here, which connects it to the other part of the body. See, that comprises of the PNS. PNS is the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral means the periphery, the outer edges. Okay, so the outer edges consist of these nerves. Okay, now that comprises that it connects the central nervous system to the outer edges, to our limbs, to our body parts, right? So that the proper functioning can take place inside our body. Like if we touch it, if we touch a hot object, we immediately move our hand, right? Why? Because the nerves takes these signals. Okay. Now let's see what is a nerve. So you can say that the nerve is a bundle of axons which are covered in the myelin sheath. So of course remember that the nerves, the peripheral nerves, are covered with the myelin sheath that was secreted by the Schwann cells. Okay, and this receives and send electrical impulses between the body and the central nervous system. The central nervous system is your brain and also your spinal cord. Okay, so this was about a nerve, that a bundle of nerve will help in the transmission. It will help in the relay of information. It will help in the relay of information. Okay, from the other parts of your body to your central nervous system. Now, let's move forward to talk about that important delicate structure which is brain, the central nervous system. Okay, it's very important to talk about its part. So let's see that the brain, can you see this brain here? This brain is divided into 3 parts. Okay, can you see this brain here? Here it's the brain. So the brain is divided into 3 parts. The forebrain and the midbrain, which is present in the middle of the brain. Okay, and then the hindbrain, that means at the back, the lowermost part. Alright, so we have the 3 parts. First is the forebrain, then we have the midbrain, and finally we have the hindbrain. Okay, this forebrain consists of the cerebellum, and then it consists of the diencephalon as well. Okay, now let's see next that we have the midbrain, and the hindbrain consist of 3 parts. The pons, you can see the medulla oblongata, and this here the external part of it. Okay, so this part here is known as the cerebellum. Now let's see the medulla oblongata continues to the spinal cord. Okay, so this is your entire CNS, central nervous system. But what are their functioning? See, we are talking, so I have a proper speech, right? It's very important to speak clearly so that the other person can interpret. Okay, now when I learn this chapter, I have to interpret as well. I have to think about it as well, right? Now I can feel a little hot in here. So of course our body has to maintain the temperature. I feel sleepy sometimes. Now all of the vital systems, right, the respiratory system and the circulatory system are happening at a proper rate. Okay, and also the involuntary actions which cannot be controlled. Like I saw something very disgusting and it created a reflex. Okay, so let's see that of course in our body some of the functions are happening involuntary, some are happening voluntary. Voluntary means that are acting on our will. I want to move from one place. I have to read something. So these are voluntary actions. But then there are involuntary actions, right? Like our respiratory system goes on and on. Now, of course, we can control our breathing, but can you control the respiration? Now, can you control your heart? Can you call your heart and say that stop beating? I don't want you to beat or pump blood. Can you do that? Of course not, right? So those are your involuntary actions which are not working on our will, okay? But then again, what are the function of these different parts? Why do we need so many parts? So let's start talking about them. But first, since these two parts are so delicate and so important, right? Of course, they have to be covered, right? So let's talk about here that these parts are covered in a bony covering, okay? And that bony covering, let's talk about here. So the cerebrum, or you can say here the brain is covered in a bony covering that is known as a cranium. Okay, let's talk about your cranium here. So you can say that they are covered in the bony part which is known as the cranium, and cranium is also known as the skull, right? So it covers, it forms a covering so that our brain is protected. Same goes with the spinal cord as well. The spinal cord is a long tube-like structure, okay? You have to protect it as well. So here you can say that the spinal cord is present under a bony structure, and that is made up of vertebral column. That is made up of vertebrae known as vertebral columns, okay? Now inside this, see, they can protect from outer mechanical shocks, right? But inside them, between the brain and the bony structure, there is a fluid, and that fluid is known as the cerebrospinal fluid. It's a very clear, colorless fluid that flows in and around the hollow spaces of the brain and spinal cord that will protect it from any sort of jerk, okay? Now, let's talk about here the parts of the brain and their function. So the topmost part was the forebrain, right? Now the forebrain consists of the cerebrum and a diencephalon, okay? Now let's talk about that this cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, and the cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres. It has been divided into two sides, okay? Two sides are there. The left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere. Now, both the cerebral hemispheres are connected by a band of nerve, and that band of nerve is known as corpus callosum. Okay, it is known as corpus callosum. All right. Now, let's see all the thinking part, the speech, the intelligence part that are done by the cerebrum, okay? So let's see, the left and the right cerebral hemispheres are joined by a band of nerve known as corpus callosum, and all the voluntary acts are done by the cerebrum. Like for example, hearing, thinking, learning, smelling, and also the sight. These are the specialized senses which are controlled by the cerebrum, okay? Now, it also helps to maintain and form the intelligence. Can you see in the brain, there are bands, right? There are bands of nerves here, neurons are present. So, they form the sulci and gyri. That means grooves and then the hill, right? So, let's see that the more the sulci and gyri, the more intelligent you are. So, of course, you can say the intelligence is controlled, and also the intelligent factor is present in the cerebrum. Okay. Now, the voluntary actions, how strong your memory is, the reasoning part, the emotional part, temperature regulation, all of these is done by the cerebrum itself. Okay. So, you can say that here in the cerebrum part, you will see your hypothalamus, right? This hypothalamus plays a very important role, and this hypothalamus will help in the sleep, it will help in the temperature regulation, it will even help in the sweating, right? So it coordinates and controls these very many different parts, okay? The desires, the emotions, most of it is controlled by the forebrain, the cerebrum, okay? Now, let's talk about the midbrain, which is present in the middle of the brain, okay? And it relays motor impulses from the cerebral cortex, the forebrain, to the spinal cord. So it helps to relay the information, okay? And it also relays sensory impulses from the spinal cord to the thalamus. That means it connects It connects the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord and the spinal cord to the cerebral cortex. Okay, and also it will help in the sight and hearing. So the sight and hearing parts are present in the midbrain. But then what about the lowermost part? The lowermost part was your hindbrain. It consists of cerebellum, pons, medulla oblongata. Okay. Now, have you seen in movies a drunkard? Why is a drunkard not able to move properly? Like, of course, there would be a movement like this. He would not be able to walk in a straight line. How is that possible? See, what happens here is, this the cerebellum. They helps to maintain your posture. Okay, your equilibrium and coordinates between the voluntary movements that are initiated by the cerebrum. So your movement, when you're learning something new, for example, when you're cycling, you're learning how to cycle. So that learning part will be done by the cerebrum. But once you are well ridden and you have learned how to cycle, after that, that will become an involuntary part, most of the involuntary part, right? Like now you don't have to learn it again and again because you have been practicing enough and now you have learned that part. So next, whenever you cycle, you do not need to learn it again because then it would be controlled by the cerebellum. So your posture, your equilibrium is controlled by the cerebellum. Now, when we talk of the alcohol, the drunkards, okay? So what will happen here? That the drunkard has consumed alcohol and this alcohol affects the cerebellum. Okay, that is why when a drunkard walks, they are not able to move in a straight line, in a linear line. Why? Because the cerebellum part, the equilibrium function is affected by the alcohol. Okay, therefore say no to alcohol. Now, let's move to the next part, medulla oblongata, which contributes in the involuntary functions. Right? For example, like blood pressure, salivation, vomiting, all of these involuntary functions, like you do not puke out at your will, right? Of course, whenever you something disgusting or because of the function something has been wrong in your stomach, in the digestive system, so then you vomit out. Why? Because that is done by the medulla oblongata, all these involuntary actions. Okay, now remember, it's a very important question. It has been asked very many times in your boards and as an MCQ, that medulla oblongata controls what? So you will say vomiting, the involuntary actions. Or it has been directly asked that vomiting is controlled by which part of the brain? So you have to say medulla oblongata or the hindbrain. Okay. Then we have a little part here, but very important, and that is known as pons. These pons regulate the respiratory system. Okay, now how do you know that you can accommodate this much oxygen inside your lungs, or you have to breathe out, right? So everything related to respiratory system is controlled by a structure in the brain, that is your pons. Okay, now let's move forward to talk about that there are different types of neurons. Okay, how do we know that we have to take this? Suppose somebody has touched, right? Or like, for example, I have hit myself on my arm. So how do they know? How do the brain know? If I'm touching something hot, how do the brain know? How do the hand know that just remove yourself from there, right? So as I told you, there are three parts. First is the perception. You have to perceive the stimulus. Next is the transmission and processing. Okay, and the third one here is the transmission, then processing, and the third one here is the motor neuron that will take it back to the effector organ. Okay, so let's talk about the different types of neurons. First, suppose here you can see that you have seen a glass of water. So you have sensed it, right? You have perceived the signal. Now from your organ, from your senses, which one? So here you can say the sensory neuron, because you're sensing, right? You're sensing the stimulus. Therefore, the sensory neuron, now you're taking it away from the organ, right? A for away. So therefore, these neurons are known as afferent neuron. which are taking the signal away from the organ towards the central nervous system, okay, or towards the nervous system. So these are your sensory neuron, or you can say the afferent neuron. Now, next part is that you have to take it back. Like for example, the brain has processed that yes, it's a image of a glass. But then how do we know? So therefore, what will happen? There would be motor neuron. You have the motor neuron that will take away the information, or you can say that will relay the information from the central nervous system towards the effector organ, where you have to take this information, okay? Like for example, here you can see the glass, right? And you want to drink the water. So what will happen? The sensory neuron will take the information that the glass is in front of it, and you have to move your hand so that you can pick up the glass. So what will happen? The motor neuron, or you can say the efferent neuron. Efferent neuron will take this signal towards the hand, your muscle that stretch your arm, and then you can pick up the glass of water. So that is done by the motor neuron or your efferent neuron, right? Now sometimes the distance is far too long between your arms and the brain, right? So what will happen? That apart from many neurons, there are intermediate neurons, or you can call them interneurons. Interneurons are present, so that see the interneurons are very thin axon, okay? So what will happen here? That they will take the information, they will connect the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. So you can call that the interneuron's function is to connect the sensory neuron with the motor neuron, okay? Now let's move to talk about the reflex arc. What do we mean by reflex arc? Again, I stretched my arm, I can see the glass. The sensory neuron took away the senses towards the brain. I can see the glass, you have to pick up, okay? The motor neuron sends the signal towards my hand, and then I stretched my arm to pick up the glass. But the glass was too hot. There was a hot water, right? So what happens? Immediately, as soon as I touched the glass, I just moved my hand back. Why is it so? One more example. That whenever like I am taking my finger and just very quickly just bring it towards your eyes, what will happen? Your eyes will immediately close itself, okay? Now again, when you hit your leg with a rod, okay, what will happen? You will immediately move your knee. So what are these actions? These actions are the reflex actions, okay? Now let's talk about it again, that the sudden and involuntary response. Now I can move my hand, right? But then very suddenly, without even thinking, just touching the hot substance, and I removed it immediately. So this became involuntary because just immediately it's happening on its own, right? So here the sudden and involuntary responses to stimulus in the environment that does not require thinking, this is known as reflex action, okay? For example, let's talk about here that you have a candle. Now there is a candle, right? You have this candle with a burning flame. Now next, what will happen? Can you keep your finger just in between the flame? Let's try to do that. What will happen? My brain is not functioning properly. I am touching my fingers are burning. Let them burn. Is it so? Of course not. As soon as you come in touch with the flame, you will move it again. Now I'm talking about the very hottest part, okay? Now don't tell me that I can move my finger within the flame. Don't do that. And of course you cannot, right? So as soon as you come in contact with the flame, you just move your hand very quickly because it's hot, right? Now what happened here? So let's see the circuit formation. First, the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron took the information from the hand towards the central nervous system. Now, for such actions, like they are too soon, you need a quick responses. For such quick responses, you do not go to your brain. You go to your spinal cord. These nerves just go towards your spinal cord. The sensory neuron goes to your spinal cord, and then there is an interneuron. So interneuron will connect the sensory neuron to your motor neuron. Of course, the spinal cord will process the information that something is hot and gives a quick response. So what will happen next is that this interneuron will connect to the motor neuron, and this motor neuron will connect the effector organ, the organ where you need the response. Okay, so it will connect the effector organ that immediately move your hand or immediately move your knee or just close your eye. So all these actions are known as reflex actions, and the pathway of these impulses, like the electrical impulses for flowing, right? So for such quick responses, the electrical impulses goes through a pathway. Here you can say from the organ towards the sensory neurons will take it to the spinal cord. The interneuron will connect it, the sensory neuron, to the motor neuron and pass the signal to the effector organ that just relax or stretch your muscle so that you can move your hand. So this circuit, this entire circuit is known as the reflex arc, and it is very, very important so that you can have quick responses and you can protect yourself. Okay, now let's move forward to talk about now the different hormonal control. I told you that the hormonal control is done by the glands. Now what are these glands? So let's talk about that. The gland is a specialized group of cells, or it could be any organ as well, or tissue, right, that produces and release substances. Now these substances could be your hormones, it could be any chemical, it could be your tears as well, right? So these glands produces some substances that will perform specific function in the body. And such cells, such group of cells, such tissues, such organs are known as glands, right? Now, where do they secrete these substances? So then, to secrete these substances, they have different kinds of glands, okay? That on the basis of that, where do they secrete their substances? So here, let's talk about that these glands are divided into two types. First, exocrine gland, and the next one is the endocrine gland. Okay, so now let's see. The exocrine glands are with the ducts. So ducts are present. Okay, for example, suppose this is your tissue. Here it is your tissue. Let's draw the nucleus as well. Okay, so this is your tissue. Now they have their own ducts, right? The target site is near them. The target site is near the glands, and they release their substances in the ducts so that they can perform the action, right? For example, your salivary gland. Salivary gland secretes saliva in the buccal cavity in the mouth itself, right? Your sweat glands. Your sweat glands that secretes the sweat, they are present in your skin, right? Your sebaceous gland that secretes sebum. All of them have their own ducts, and those glands are known as exocrine glands. Okay? Whereas on the other hand, we have endocrine glands. Endocrine gland, you can say the target site, target site is far away from the secretion from the gland. The target site is far from the glands. Okay? So then what do they do? Suppose you have this gland here. Okay, the target site is somewhere very, very different. So then what do? We secrete these substances in the blood vessel. Okay, so they secrete the substances in the blood vessels, and the blood vessels take it to the target site. The hormones, the chemicals are taken in the blood vessel to the target site so that they can perform the function. So you can say that the endocrine glands are also known as ductless gland because they do not have their own ducts, but rather they secrete in the blood vessel, which takes these substances to their target site where they have to perform the action where these substances are required. Okay, now let's talk about these endocrine glands, a little bit of detail that will help in the coordination. Okay, so let's see that very important glands are there, and those are your hypothalamus, pituitary and pineal glands. and these are present in your brain. Okay, so hypothalamus, pituitary gland and pineal gland, they are present in your brain. Let's talk about this pituitary gland first. Do you know that this pituitary gland is known as the master gland? Because why master gland? What is the function of a master? The master controls everything, right? Similarly, here this pituitary gland, it controls. Let's talk about that it controls the secretion of all the other glands. It controls the secretion of all the other glands, as well as it secretes growth hormone. So what will be the effect? Observation here, that when this pituitary gland secretes the growth hormone, you will see that there is an increase in your height. And also all the other organs, all the other glands will start secreting their hormones. That is also under the control of the pituitary gland. Okay. Now let's talk about that. For this pituitary gland, we again have a master. So master of the master gland is your hypothalamus. This hypothalamus commands the pituitary gland to secrete its substances, to secrete its hormones. The hormones are the chemical substances, right? Non-nutrient chemical substances that can bring about any action. So here, the hypothalamus also contributes to the formation of the substances or hormones by the pituitary gland. It signals them. Okay. Then we have the pineal gland. Now let's talk about that. Whenever there is darkness, why do we feel drowsy? And of course, why do we always sleep at night and wake up at the morning? Like if you not have a proper routine, like you will always sleep at night, right? Otherwise, if you can also develop it, if you're not sleeping at night, you can sleep in the day. But that you need to develop. But inbuilt, what is the inbuilt thing here? That you sleep at night and wake up at the day, right? Why is it so? Is there something clock? Is there a particular clock that is present inside our body? Let's think about it. So of course, yes, there is. And let's talk about it is the pineal gland. Okay. Now the pineal gland is your internal clock. What happens here is that this pineal gland secretes melatonin. It's a hormone that is melatonin. Okay. Now this whenever there is darkness, that means the melatonin is more. So in the darkness, it promotes or it induces the drowsiness. Okay. That's why when you're not able to sleep at the day, and if you want to take a nap or if you want to take rest, you just shut all the curtains, right? You just shut all the curtains. Why is it so? Because to create a night-like environment, the darkness, right? So that the melatonin would be more, and of course you can sleep well. Okay. So here you can say the pineal gland, it is our internal clock. Okay. But apart from them, there are other endocrine glands as well, and which plays a very important role. All the endocrine glands have an important role in our body. They are helping in the coordination. Okay. So let's start talking about the next type of endocrine gland, and this is our thyroid gland. Now, you are making your energy, right? You are eating your food, you are breathing in, taking in the oxygen, and in the presence of oxygen, you are breaking down the food. So you are making energy. But how does the body utilize that energy? That proper usage of the energy is controlled by the thyroid gland. So that means this thyroid gland is responsible for the maintenance of our metabolism. Now, how does it control our metabolism? So thyroid gland secretes an hormone that is known as thyroxine. Thyroxine is the hormone that controls the metabolic rate or metabolism of our body. So to observe its function, you can see the proper utilization of the energy in our body. Okay. Now next, let's talk about the pancreas. See, these pancreas are very important. And also, the pancreas is a very specific or special thing about this pancreas, that they can act as both exocrine gland as well as endocrine gland as well. Okay. Now, we have talked about the life process. In the life process, we have learned digestion. Now, in the digestion, we know that the pancreas secretes some enzymes. that will help in the proper digestion of the food, right? So that is their exocrine function, that they secrete the enzymes in the small intestine, right? So of course that is their exocrine function. But then what about endocrine? So they also help to carry out the endocrine function, or they act as endocrine gland, because suppose I am so happy, I want to celebrate that you guys are here with me and you're learning with me. You're so motivated, you're learning, so I want to celebrate you guys. And how do we do that? So to celebrate it, I made this amazing pineapple cake. Okay, and let's lit up the candle as well here to celebrate you guys. Okay, and I have eaten a lot of this cake. Of course, this cake has sugar. We want to celebrate with some sweetness, right? Now, whenever I eat this sugar, or the sugar consists of a carbohydrate, that is glucose, right? So what will happen? That in the blood, in my blood, the glucose concentration increases. But no worries, I will celebrate you guys, okay? So what will happen? I'm so happy. I've eaten the cake and the glucose concentration increases. Not only in the cake, but whatever food you are eating consists of this sugar, and therefore, whenever you eat it, the glucose concentration is getting increased. But then, what will happen? Excess of anything is bad. So what do? We cannot have this excess glucose, otherwise it will lead to a disorder, that is diabetes. You might have heard people calling that I have sugar, I cannot eat cake, I have sugar, I cannot eat sweets, right? Why? Because they are suffering from diabetes. Okay, so then what do? How do we control this glucose level? So to control this glucose level, we have our very own pancreas, and the pancreas will release a hormone, and that hormone is your insulin. So what does this insulin do? The insulin, whenever it finds the pancreas, whenever it finds the increased amount of glucose in our blood, what will happen? It will secrete this hormone insulin. And this insulin will bring down the glucose level. It will bring down the glucose level from our blood vessels, right? So it will control it, and of course it will induce the deposition of this excess glucose in the form of glycogen in our muscle cells or in the liver. Okay, so that is the function of pancreas. But we even have, now what do? Like suppose when there is something that is not going like on our will, so there is something that I want to fight with the situation, right? Like for example, let me tell you that one day I was walking, and of course I love dogs, but then I am too scared of them. So the dog started running behind me. Now what do? Of course I cannot wait. I did not look here and there. I just started running away from the dog. So that created a fight impulse in me, right? The flight impulse, that I have to run away from this situation. Now, if in place of dog, let's suppose there is someone that I know, and I know that I can fight to it, right? So what will happen? That I will stand there, and if somebody is coming very aggressively towards me, I will fight with the situation. I will fight with the person. Of course, not I'm saying that fighting is not good, okay? So please do not fight with your peers. So now let's talk about here. What is happening? The fight and flight response. Like something of our own height and weight, we can fight with them. But what if like there are super duper, very muscled and very big postures of somebody is there? So what do? We in our mind know that we cannot fight them. So we will flight away from them. We will say that, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow. I'll meet you after some time, right? So what is that? That is your fight and flight response. That whether I can fight with the situation or I should run away when it's quiet, right? So this fight and flight response, the fight and flight response is generated by the adrenal gland. These glands are present on top of your kidneys, okay? And they release an hormone which is adrenaline. This adrenaline hormone will increase and will induce the fight or flight response in your body. Okay? Now, not only these glands, but there are some organs as well that will act as these glands, because they will also secrete hormones. Okay? We are talking about the human gonads in female as well as in male. Okay, so female gonad is your ovaries and the male gonad is your testis. Right? Now what's happening here? So ovaries will secrete a hormone, that is your estrogen, and the male testis will secrete a hormone, that is your testosterone. Testosterone. See, whenever we are talking about the hormones or these glands, their location, their hormone, and what are the function they are performing, it's very important. Okay, so keep three things in mind when you're learning gonads. Now let's talk about here that what are the function of these ovaries and testes. They release estrogen and testosterone. We are talking about the endocrine function. Okay, now what is the function of estrogen and testosterone? So in individuals, they will develop secondary sexual characters. They will develop secondary sexual characters. Like for example, after adolescence, or you can say during adolescence, you can see that the male voice deepens, and the women that they develop breast and their hips get widened. Okay, so widened hips, development of breast in females, also deepening of voice and formation of beard and mustache. So that are the secondary sexual characteristics in the individuals which are developed or which are induced by the hormones estrogen and testosterone, developed or secreted by the gonads, ovaries and testes in females and males respectively. Okay, now so about these gonads, now let's talk about the plants. See, we have talked about that the humans, in response to these hormones, there are a lot of things happening. They are inducing a lot of functions. But what about these plants? We know plants also have emotions, right? Do you know? See, it has been found in scientific theories. It has been said that when you're talking to a plant in a very polite way, in a humble way, and you're always saying that I believe in you, plant, you can grow well, the plant will grow well. But if you always go and curse the plant, just start cursing the plant for a long time, and then you will notice that the plant will wilt. Of course, you're giving it water, but you're cursing it. So the plant will wilt. Okay. So plant, it has been said that it has been found that the plant also have emotions. But similarly, plant also have hormones. These hormones will bring about or perform a function so that they can coordinate with the growth and development of the plant as well. Now, there are 5 types of plant hormones. Okay. Now, some could be plant growth accelerator or plant growth promoters. Okay. And others could be plant growth inhibitor. Others could be plant growth inhibitors. Okay. Let's start talking about these hormones. So, the plant have first auxin, very important. Now, where is it present? So, can you see the plant shoots and roots? It is majorly present in the plant shoot and roots, and it is produced there. Okay. But what is its function? So, it will help in the growth of shoot and roots of the plant. It will help in the growth of shoots and roots of the plant. So, whenever there is auxin, you will see that the plant will grow in the shoot and in the root. So, it helps in the elongation of the shoot and root. Okay. But this is the unidirectional growth. That means the root will grow downwards and the shoot will grow upwards. This is a unidirectional growth. Okay. Then we have another hormone which is gibberellin. Now, this gibberellin is found in the young leaves or embryos and even in the meristematic tissue that will develop, that has the capability to divide. Okay. So, those are meristematic tissues. But what is the function of this gibberellin? So, let's see that first, they will also help the auxin in the stem elongation. Okay. They also will help to produce the seedless fruits like bananas. Bananas are seedless fruits, right? So, how are they formed? Because of the production of gibberellins. Okay, gibberellins induce their formation. Then, they also induce seed germination. Like, for example, it is very important for the seeds to germinate so that they can form a new plant, right? That is done under the influence of gibberellins. Now, you can see both of these are inhibitors or promoters. See, auxin and gibberellins are promoters. They will promote the growth. As you can see, they are promoting the growth of shoot and root, stem elongation, seed germination. So, they are promoting the growth, right? Therefore, they are accelerators of growth. Now, let's talk about the next one, which is the cytokinin. This cytokinin is mostly produced in the fruits, embryos and the roots, and it will help the plant in the branching. It will induce the branching and it will promote the lateral growth, right? All of that, auxin and gibberellin, we see that they are having the unidirectional growth of roots and shoots, but this cytokinin will help in the development of the lateral sides, right? So they will help in lateral growth. It is again a plant growth promoter. Moving forward to talk about next hormone, which is abscisic acid, and this abscisic acid is found in the leaves, in the stems, in the roots, in the fruits, right? Whereas they induce bud dormancy, they produce seed dormancy, they promote it, right? For example, if there's a situation which is not favorable for them, if the seeds are present in that situation, they might not germinate well. Like for example, a lot of water, right? Or less of water. Now let's talk about their deficiency of nutrients. So in such unfavorable conditions, the temperature is not favorable. So in such unfavorable conditions, the seed or the bud moves towards dormancy. Dormancy means this is actually a suspended stage where the growth is stopped. There is no growth happening, just the survival. Okay, so that is seed dormancy, which is promoted by the abscisic acid. Okay, and also when there is deficiency of water, like during the drought condition, it will help to close the stomatas. And what does the stomata do? Stomatas help in the exchange of gases as well as transpiration. Transpiration is the excess loss of water from the aerial parts of the plant. Why? Because there are stomatas present. So that will help in the loss of water. But during drought, there is not enough water for the plant itself, right? So what do? We need to reduce this loss of water. We need to protect and conserve the water. Now how do we do it? So abscisic acid will help here so that they can close the stomatas and reduce water loss. But as you can see that they are making the seed or pushing the seed towards dormancy, towards a suspended stage. So this is your inhibitor. It is your plant growth inhibitor. Okay. Next, very important, very important, ethylene. Now, what does the ethylene do? So, ethylene is also present in polythenes, right? Now, when you see, if you store your fruits or vegetables in polythene, they tend to get rotten very soon, right? Now, why is it so? So, what does this ethylene do? Let's see that it is mostly found in the tissues of ripening fruits, the nodes of the stem, or aging leaves and flowers, okay? And the function of ethylene are ripening of the fruits and shedding of the leaves. That means here you can say that if you store the fruits or vegetables inside the polythene, they get ripened soon. Why is it so? Because it consists of ethylene, and ethylene will help in the ripening of the fruits. And the sooner they get ripe, the sooner they will get rotten, right? So, of course, this ethylene will help in the ripening or shedding of the leaves. It will induce senescence, okay? Senescence is the aging of the plant. Now, after this plant hormones, we have one last topic to talk about. Now, so far, we have only talked about humans, right? That how do humans respond to the stimuluses? Of course, with the aid of nervous system. Now, what about these immovable organisms, plants? Do they also respond to these stimulus? Let's talk about it, okay? So, of course, in response to these stimuluses, like it could be light, touch, water, gravity, these different kinds of stimulus will induce a different kind of response from the plants, okay? So, here the plants will show movements. Now, there are two types of movements. First is the tropic movement, which is also known as tropism. And then here is the nastic movement. Okay. Now, what is the difference between these two movements? So let's check that the tropic movements are growth dependent. That means if you see the stimulus, that means the plant sees the stimulus, or in response to the stimulus, there would be the growth. Okay. Now, this would be directional and it would be very slow. Whereas when we talk of the nastic movement, it is growth independent and also directionless, and the response would be very quick, very fast, right? For example, let's talk of the example of a plant, touch me not plant. In scientific name, we call it Mimosa pudica. Okay. Now, can you see this plant? It has some leaves like this. Okay. So, of course, when you come closer or when you touch this plant, what will happen? As a defense mechanism, it will close itself very quickly. Just touch it and it will close itself. Okay. So, this is in response to the touch. Therefore, it is known as thigmonastic movement. Whereas it is not directional, you will not see that there is any sort of growth and the response was very quick, right? So this was nastic movement. But let's talk about the tropic movement now, okay? So here you can see that the tropic movement is the movement of the plant in response to the stimuluses which is present in the environment. Now, if this response is in the favor of the stimulus, it would be known as the positive response, and if the response is against that stimulus, it would be negative response, okay, or negative movement you can say. Now, on the base of the different kinds of stimulus, you can categorize the tropic movement into different kinds. Like for example, first we are talking about phototropism. Whenever there is a word photo, it means light, okay. So, in response to the light, there would be some growth. For example, as you can see in sunflower. Why does the sunflower always faces the sun? Because it perceives the light. And as it perceives the light, you will see the movement or the growth would be in that direction. Okay. So, this is positive phototropism. Now, next kind is the geotropism. What do we mean by geo? So, geo means in regard to the gravity. Now, will you see the plant? You will always notice that the roots are underground, generally, okay? And the shoots are above the ground. Now, why is it so? So, here you will notice that when there is root, they are showing positive geotropism. That means when they find gravity, they will grow in regard to that gravity. So, that means they will grow underground, okay? Whereas, shoots show negative geotropism. That means they will grow in the opposite direction of the gravity. The next one here we have is the chemotropism. Chemo word, that means chemical. Now let's quickly summarize. We know the pollen consists of the male gamete and it will come and stick at the stigma of the female reproductive part. Now this is your stigma and this is your style with a swollen base of ovary. Here is your pollen grain. And now when the pollen grain reaches, it's when it passes the compatibility test and forms the pollen tube. Why does this pollen tube always grow towards the ovary? Why not in the opposite direction? It is because they show positive chemotropism. In the ovaries, you will see that there are secretions of chemicals, right? So, in regard to these chemicals, the pollen tube always grow towards the ovary. So, that is your positive chemotropism. Next here is the thermotropism. Thermo means temperature. So, at different temperatures, right, like whether it could be hot temperature or cold, you will see the movement or the growth of plant would be very different, right? Because some are positive thermotropism and some show negative thermotropism. And the last one we are talking about is hydrotropism. Hydro, you have to keep yourself hydrated. Why? Hydro term is related to the word water. And water is very essential. Not only for us, for the plants as well, right? So here you can say when there was no water as shown here. So what will happen? The roots were growing because of geotropism. But then as soon as the roots found water, they started growing in the direction of water. So this is known as positive hydrotropism. Okay. Now we have learned a lot of things about humans, about plants, and how well we keep ourselves in control and coordinated. So now it's time to check our concept and see that yes, we are thorough with the concept. So what do? Let's solve our quiz. Okay. Now the first question is that we have to match the following columns, column 1 and column 2. Here you have been given some receptors. And here you have been given that these receptors will respond to the stimulus of what? Okay. So first one is olfactory receptors. Olfactory receptors. Olfaction is related to smell. Okay. So here you will say that the smell will be perceived by the olfactory receptors. Now what about these thermoreceptors? Thermo, temperature. So we know thermoreceptor perceives the temperature. Gustatory. Now how are we able to taste different kinds of flavors? We have sour, sweet, bitter, right? How are we tasting that? Because of the presence of gustatory receptors. So gustatory receptors perceives the taste. And what about photoreceptors? Photo means light, right? So when we click our photos, we need light. So of course photoreceptors perceives the vision. It will help in the vision. Okay. So here the correct answer would be option D. Moving to the next question. Now, which one of the following represents the correct sequence of reflex action? So, what was reflex action? The sudden or involuntary movement, right? Without even thinking to any stimulus. Now, let's talk about it. What was the circuit here? What was the reflex arc here? So, first, suppose you have seen a candle. You have tried to touch the candle. What will happen? That of course you will show sudden movement without even thinking. Why is it so? Because there are receptors present. They will perceive the stimulus. Then here is present another nerve, and that is your sensory neurons. This sensory neuron will take this information in the form of electrical impulse, and that will take it to the spinal cord. The spinal cord will process this information. The spinal cord will process this information. Then of course there is something wrong. You shouldn't be just putting your hand in the fire. So what do? They process the information and then give results. Okay. So spinal cord, there are interneuron present, and the interneuron will connect the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. These motor neuron will carry the processed information to the effector organ. Here the effector organ would be muscle. They will ask the muscle to stretch or sometimes to relax, right? So that they can get the movement of the hand, and then what will happen? The hand will be moved from the fire. So what is the correct sequence? What is the exact reflex arc formed here? That first the receptor receives the senses, then the sensory neuron takes it to the spinal cord. The spinal cord will process it, and the motor neuron will take the processed information to the muscle. Hence the correct answer is option D. Moving to the next question. Hypothalamus has control centers for. We know that hypothalamus performs a very important role in our body. It's even the master of the master gland, right? So let's see that the hypothalamus helps to control our sweating, sleep, and also controls our body temperature. It will help in the temperature regulation. So all of these are the correct answer for this question. Okay. Moving to the last question, that a growing seedling is kept in a dark room. A seedling, of course, we know that they need proper sunlight to grow, but we have kept it in the dark room. Now let's see what is the question asking. So a burning lamp is placed near to it for a few days. The top part of the seedling then started to bend towards the burning lamp. Now why is it so? So let's check that first, when there was a dark room, there was no stimulus, right? So what will happen now? That the seed was germinating, but as soon as they find some light, so they will start bending towards this stimulus. What is the stimulus here? Light. That means the plant showed their movement, and this is in regard to the stimulus, and it is growth related. So this type of movement is tropic movement. In regard to which kind of stimulus? Light. Light means photo, right? So this is an example of phototropism. Alright, and with this we have come towards the end of the session. I hope all the concepts are clear to all of my dear buddies, and like this I would say we would meet super soon with another of the concept. Okay, so till then, take care of yourselves and we shall meet soon with another chapter. So bye bye guys, take care.